Welcome to Late Night. I'm Patrick, filling in for Isaac until my talents are finally recognized.
Okay, quick catch up for you. The writers say we should talk about some of the lesser known candidates in the election so we can keep our coverage even.
Okay, which ones?
I don't know. I was hoping they brought you in to keep the educated coverage better.
No, I'm here because I was available.
Okay, well, first up in national news, the Ukrainian city of Odessa elected the Star Wars villain Emperor Palpatine to their city council.
What a time to be alive.
Alexander Borovic ran for the position under the Sith Lord's name and even wore his costume in the campaign.
He would have had my vote, especially after the untimely demise of my former favorite candidate, Kit Fisto.
This isn't the first time Odessa has expressed its love for Star Wars, though. Just a week before the election, a statue of Vladimir Lenin was dressed up in a Darth Vader costume, and almost 50 candidates ran for city council using names from the film franchise. Sulu Chekhov 2015.
That's Star Trek. Anyway, let's just hope Odessa's local government is more effective than the actual Jedi Council, which was brought down by its reliance on archaic mysticism and its aversion to technological progress, much like a certain American political party.
R.I.P. Gandalf and the rest of the Khaleesi crew. And we've got even more idiocy. A man in Washington was pulled over in a carpool lane for not putting his child in a car seat.
Wow, some people just aren't meant to be parents, or at the very least in possession of a child.
True, but when the cops actually stopped him, there wasn't even a kid in the car.
He had an ejection seat and he used it on his child? What kind of suave-ass monster are we dealing with?
A zombie.
Oh, isn't this apocalypse thing a little played out by now?
Not quite yet. Turns out there wasn't even a kid in the car at all. The guy had a zombie doll propped up in the passenger seat to trick the carpool cameras.
Well, at least he tried to justify the purchase of an overpriced Halloween decoration. That's American ingenuity at its finest. And all in all, it wasn't the worst plan ever.
Nah, this guy was an amateur. If you want to really pull off something like this, you need to talk to the guy who faked his way into the Spectre premiere.
I tried that once. Turned out I'm not quite handsome enough to sneak in as a Bond actor or a Bond girl.
Well, this guy took a more subtle route. He downloaded a picture of a ticket off Instagram and printed it out on a nice piece of paper.
That's it?
Yeah, pretty much.
I just have to take a picture off Instagram.
I mean, yeah.
Wow, this is great. I could get anywhere. The Star Wars premiere, the Price is Right, the Talk.
Okay, maybe not there.
The Pentagon, Area 51, North Korea.
Definitely not.
The Duke game.
Patrick, do you even know how to use Photoshop? How are you going to make all these tickets?
You know, I came here, took time out of my busy schedule to sit behind this desk and read from that teleprompter, and now I just get grief. All right, I have dreams, Eleanor. I have skills.
Okay, we're all really sorry. Wait, hang on. He faked it? He faked the fake?
Mother faker! Whatever happened to honor among thieves?
Well, it doesn't matter anyway. You could always break into the zoo instead. All you need is copious amounts of alcohol and an unhealthy obsession with cats.
Consider it done.
A woman in Nebraska broke into a zoo while drunk and was only bitten by one tiger.
Jeez, Eleanor, don't you think one is enough?
I guess. I'm just more disappointed in the tiger than anyone else. They must feed these things too well these days.
Probably why this lady broke in. Those ticket prices just keep going up to compensate. I mean, it almost cost her an arm and a leg.
Luckily, late night is always free. And we've got a great show for you tonight. Cameron Bynum and Jackson Hall are here to perform slam poetry.
Going on a diet? Can't get that salad you pay for? What makes those women tick? What makes them laugh when they eat salad? Introducing weed balls. Unleash the full potential behind your salad. May contain hallucinogenic properties, transform you into a vegetable, or make you high.
Hi, we're here with Cameron and Jackson from the Wordsmiths, the UNC spoken word group, and we're just gonna have a little conversation with them.
They've got their warm drinks ready. We can see that, and we don't have any, so they have all the warmth.
We'll try to share.
That's very generous of you. Thank you.
Just like to start off, how did you guys get started in poetry?
You go. Okay, cool. I got started in poetry kind of, so before like high school, mid-high school, I thought that poetry was just something that old white men did.
Sure.
Because that's what you read in high school. But I went to this summer program called Governor School.
Okay.
And there was a weekly slam poetry event. So I had no idea what that was, but I went. And there was like just these really boss-ass poets just like doing really good poems. And I'm like, I want to do that. And I kept writing, and my poems were terrible at first. But the more and more I wrote, the more people said, that's not that terrible. And I keep going.
So you managed to avoid the awkward middle school poetry phase entirely by starting later.
There was still awkward middle
There
school
we go.
poems.
Yeah.
It's just I wrote them in high school.
Gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha.
gotcha. It was condensed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of writing kind of angsty, sappy poems. It's just a little bit
Where's
more.
the poetry without the angst?
Exactly.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm taking it. Unfortunately, I had to go through the awkward middle school poetry phase because poetry began around in middle school when,
I'm pretty sure poetry began a lot earlier, friend.
That's where it was invented.
yeah, by old dead white men who sort of rot under the ground now. No, one of my middle school teachers, Jamie Powell, just singled me out one day and said, "Oh, you're a very good writer. You should continue doing this." And writing and reading poetry not only gave me a sense of confidence, but sort of a sense of clarity of what I guess wanted it to be at such an early formative stage in middle school. And it's just something I just stuck with progressively. And now he and I are in the senior honors program here at UNC for creative writing and poetry. I've read many of his current poems, and there is a tinge of angst. But so for mine, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I was started.
How many breakup poems of mine have you heard?
Everyone. Every single one.
You have
They've
to
all
read a
been
poem
breakup
after
poems.
breakup.
That's
Yeah.
true friendship right there.
Exactly.
Reading breakup
He
poems.
stuck through the whole thing.
So I guess for our viewers out there who are less familiar with slam poetry, can you talk a little bit about the difference between slam poetry and other forms of poetry?
That's your thesis.
It's not my thesis. So to specify, there's slam poetry and there's poetry slam. A poetry slam is an event. It's a competitive form of spoken word poetry where a group of competitors will perform poems in front of an audience, be judged by 5 people on a scale of 0 to 10, and the individual with the highest point scores after, let's say, 2 or 3 rounds is the victor. So slam poetry, it's a spoken word poetry that's done during a poetry slam, but spoken word poetry is basically poetry written and intended, at least in some parts, to be performed in front of an audience in an open space. At least that's sort of the conventional definition of it. For me, I think poetry is supposed to exist and be read aloud, and that's just sort of the style I grew up with. But people have different, definitions for it. Like Cameron may have a different definition.
I think Jackson covered a lot of the ground. I think one of the things to think about with slam poetry is that it's performative. It's made to be embodied by the speaker and be put onto a stage where people can hear it. And it really shapes the poems differently, where what you get out of a slam poem is not what you would get out of a page poem. On a page poem, you can do 30-line meditation on like roses. If you do that on stage, while very profound, it probably won't captivate the audience. And so there's a little bit, the slam poems tend to be a little bit more, can I say, provocative. And they try to like break bounds, and they do so in interesting ways.
So is that kind of what led you, like what inspired or led you to get involved with slam poetry over other types of performance?
Should I go? Because I'm holding the mic? Okay. So freshman year here at UNC, there's this event called the Week of Welcome Slam. And it's held every year by Erot Poetry. And it basically takes local slam poets and allows them to compete against each other. And it's really just a showcase of what slam poetry is, in order to both advertise for Erot Poetry so they can get new members, and sort of like hold an event at the beginning of the year to really like start slam poetry back, which is interesting because they're not actually a slam poetry club. That's what Wordsmiths does, but that's beside the point. Anyways,
Did I sense a hint of competition there, or are you just totally different spheres?
We're in different spheres insofar as they do performance poetry, in like they hold performances and they hold like events, whereas typically we just create the space for the slam.
And I think sort of like Cameron's stepping over performance poetry, spoken word poetry, slam poetry. It indicates that these are very amorphous worlds that cross into each other, that cross over each other, and that a lot of these definitions that we use to separate poetry, slam poetry, spoken word poetry, performance poetry, all have a arbitrary essence to them to a certain extent. So you have to take that as you will. For me, with slam poetry, I initially got involved around freshman year or first year here, performing at slams, doing open mics. And then a year after, I started photographing frequently for the Wordsmiths and other spoken word events and other open mics and poetry slams. So a lot of what I've been doing has been basically documenting the spoken word community around UNC. I've been interviewing a lot of featured poets. I interviewed Cameron for the Wordsmiths podcast, which will be coming out around next semester, ideally.
Is that going to be on iTunes or anywhere, or where will we find that?
It will get on iTunes. It'll also be on the Wordsmiths Facebook page. Basically, any sort of medium we can get it onto, we'll distribute it.
Cool.
I guess what you guys were saying too, that also like leads me to one of my other questions. Do you, because there's like Erot and there's the Sacrificial Poets and then there's the Wordsmiths, do you have like competition between each other, or is it all very friendly and you do big slams together and things like that?
Well, Wordsmiths is the extension of Sacrificial Poets on UNC's campus.
Okay.
Ideally, spoken word and also poetry slams in general are supposed to foster a collaborative community. Sort of the big secret about poetry slams is that they're not intended to be competitions. Basically, what attracts a crowd to a poetry slam instead of an open mic is the theater of competition. And what poets needed to happen was for audiences to come, congregate, and hear their poetry. And audiences were more likely to congregate if there was the, again, theater of competition, if there was the hint of a victor, if there was this drama that would play into it. And so poetry slam, I think Cameron might corroborate me on this, there's a bit of a sort of dual consciousness that goes around there of being a competition but not being competition. Because when competition drives the poetry singularly, then what happens is the poetry becomes very specific. It becomes less varied because we'll see that a particular poem with particular themes will be successful at a poetry slam, and more people would write like that. But as we see a variety of different slam poems. And I think that gives to the truth that poetry slam presents itself as a competition, but also offers itself as a collaborative environment where people's stories can be shared and corroborated and experienced.
When is the next performance? I'm excited.
So we have a performance this Saturday, but this will come out after Saturday, so it wouldn't make sense. So what I'll tell you about is the bigger performance, and that is going to be during finals. It's going to be December 3rd. It's going to be at the Stone Center inside of the theater. And it's going to be called the Final Slam. And basically what this event is it gives the opportunity for it's the the culmination, that's the word. The culmination of all the other slams that we've had. The winners of each of those slams and the people who've gotten the most points will come and compete against each other to see who can go to nationals this year. And nationals is going to be held in Austin, Texas, right?
Great.
Why are you looking at me like I know?
Yeah.
That is photograph, man.
So
It's a poetic town.
It is a poetic town. Basically, nationals called Cup C is where colleges across the nation are going to compete against each other, and UNC has been there since as long as I've been here, so at least 4 years. And we haven't got first place yet, but I think we will this year.
We've gone in top 5.
So come out to our show on December 3rd. We will be having an amazing feature by the name of Paul Tran. You can look up his videos online. We'll be posting them in order to publicize the event. And yeah.
Awesome.
That
Thank
sounds
you so
awesome.
much. Thank you for being here. And
Thanks.
I think we're about to hear y'all perform, and I'm really excited.
Over to you.
In survival, there is a rule of 3. You see, the average person can last 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. It will take 3 minutes before your lungs become busted birthday balloons. This is not a poem about surviving. 3 minutes remaining. Now introducing a brand new cure for drapetomania. You know, the mental illness that affects uppity niggas and slaves with a bad case of the runaways. First, tie the wrist to an old oak tree. Make sure you keep pulling until you hear the rope creaking. Now you may administer the whipping. Using only your wrist and forearm, because honestly, you don't want to start sweating over something so menial. Start to swing. Do so repetitively. Do so until you can see the tissue bubble up past the flesh, until you can see leak from his skin the parts that God made the correct color. Now, you may raise up your shoplifted property. Make sure all of your workers are able to stop and see what happens to those who commit robbery. Make sure they hear how he coughs, how he chokes, how he wheezes, how his lungs have become broken litanies that they are never to repeat. Listen how he breathes in and out like ticking. 2 minutes remaining. I am glad they took my eyes from me. Chop my ears off, I do not want to see them anymore. I can only smell their jubilee. The crisp cakes they brought to eat while they watched me, the children's sweets, the smell of freshly cut pine below my bare feet. It was several minutes before I realized where the smell of roasted meat came from. You see, they used to call us savages, animals, but now they are feasting on the image of my effigy. They've made a Negro barbecue of me while I'm on this tree, suffocating on my own fumes, floating in and out of fire like a tug of war between burning and breathing, a grandfather clock pendulum ticking. 1 minute remaining. Breathe. The flashes he sees in the side of his eyes are not police lights. Breathe. The cord wrapped around his neck are not hoodie strings. Breathe. The pants around his ankles are not shackles. This is not the sound of him running for the police, but from the clouds it is breathe. 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 There is a reason these things sound so familiar. There is a reason we feel so Pavlovian trained to them. You see, they revolutionized the dog industry. They now have chain-link fences so strong they stay even when the collars no longer remain. They tase those that bark too loudly. Lock them up in dog pounds, put them to sleep as need be, take their pups and put them into shelters until we can find them proper owners. And still, you can stick to the old leashes if you want to. It's amazing what you can do with a little rope and string. It's like puppeteering. Simply leave your marionettes hanging long enough and they will straighten out any kinks they find in the line for you. They will paint their chains golden until they can make them look beautiful. They will hang themselves so that you don't have to.
This poem is about a Sloss furnace. It's a iron foundry in Birmingham, Alabama in the early 20th century. Generated a lot of iron and steel, but abused a lot of underclass labor, including people of color, Irish, and Italians. Sloss furnaces. The black belt offered pig iron, and politicians called it magic. And on the 8th day, the Lord planted limestone, coal, and ore into the earth, the bedrock for a womb, pregnant with the molten egg of Birmingham, Alabama. And in the 13th year of the 20th century, the children of John Henry were employed by the dozens and cast by the hundreds down into the mines, crying with Italians and Irish down in the darkness, singing Black Betty in the shafts against the rhythm of a pickaxe, dragging the steel sow of Jefferson County out of the magma and on to the brickyard. Her body was carved and rebuilt into a city. Her legs were lined like rails, her metal tendons stretching towards Atlanta, where the devil whistled and waited with a train ticket, a bale of cotton, and a bottle of Coca-Cola. And come the day, he'd cast himself within an iron skin, and every white man around would call him Mr. Vulcan. And when the sun got hot and his hand got to smoking, he'd pull out a little fiddle and play a little jig from hell, and God damn, another foundry would be charmed up from the dust, rock, and fire below. The stove flames were fed with coke, shoveled by gangs of immigrants and convicts mistaken for the damned. A man once fell into the furnace, but up jumped the devil, and his strings squealed, a reel of a red machine, and the man rose, molten, faceless. A miracle for the newspapers. Then come the night, creeping in the dead hour between the shotgun shacks where the labor slept with soot and kin, child, mother, father. The devil would drop dynamite inside the mines. And when the blast would start the morning shift, the boss would just call it a sunrise.